So I'm John Burns. I'm the local councillor for Haverhill Town and District. I'm hosting this Zoom meeting on the basis that our two hosts from our previous meetings are not available tonight. So the idea is, I think that Oliver will present something over the next 20 odd minutes. I suggest while he's doing that, we just, as we are having most of you anyway, turn the cameras off and the audio off. And at the end of that presentation, I'm sure Oliver will be open to answer some questions, if that's all right with you, Oliver.
Absolutely. And if there's any burning, then yeah, just interrupt me. No problems.
Yeah. Okay. You can either do that in the chat or raise your hand on using reactions if you're using some sort of desktop or laptop. Okay, over to you, Oliver.
Yeah, thanks very much, John. Thanks for having me here. It's really fantastic to be a part of this Haverhill Sustainable Week, or it's an ambitious undertaking, and it's so great to see so many people being involved. So I'm going to try and share my screen now. Entire screen, and then I'm going to go to this one. Hopefully you can see me there. Can you see my presentation there?
Yes, I can,
John.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. So I'm an energy advisor for West Suffolk Council. I work in the environment and energy team, and I've been working with the council since 2016. Prior to that, I've worked for consultancies, charities, other local authorities, and installation companies. I'm a member of the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment, and I'm a member of the Chartered Institute of Building Service Engineers as a low carbon consultant in operations of buildings. I became interested in carbon footprinting in around 2003, and I was originally reading about ecological footprints. And from that, it took me into working for a local authority, learning about energy use in buildings, and then learning about renewable energy. And then I moved over to look at commercial buildings and what was called carbon management then at the time, which was being funded by the Carbon Trust. And that was my move into slightly bigger buildings and larger organisations. So I've worked for the Church of England and Superdrug, and I've worked for Groundwork here in Suffolk, and then obviously I've worked for myself. I set up a social enterprise, and now work for the West Suffolk Council. So I've got a range of things to talk about. Got no memory on my computer, but really I suppose the main thing I would like to do to get across to people is that there is loads going on. It's been building for a long time. There was an upwards curve up until 2009, and then things sort of stepped back, and there was a few setbacks. There was a change of government, and the Conference of Parties for Climate Change in Copenhagen didn't go as everybody expected. And anyway, from then onwards, there was a bit of a lull. There's lots of things going on, but it was not so much energy behind us, not so much money behind it and resources. And over the last, say 2-3 years, things have really stepped up. So there's lots going on in West Suffolk, in Suffolk, in the eastern region, and across the whole country. See if I can get my computer to respond. Right. So the first thing to talk about is the net zero emissions target. This is a statutory target. It's a legal requirement now for the government. It has put it in place. It replaced the target of 80% reduction by 2050 now with this net zero emissions of greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, and they are aiming for 100% reduction. But the approach taken, this net zero, is then acknowledging that potentially there will be some emissions that will not be able to be they will continue going. They won't be able to stop them. So things like maybe cement or some chemical processes or refrigeration. And those will not be able to be stopped. So on the left hand side here we have a tower of different emissions, which shows the different proportions of them: power, industry, the amount from residential buildings, non-domestic and non-residential buildings, and then things called F gases, which is fluorinated gases, which are used in refrigeration and other industrial activities, land use and agriculture that has sort of a balance of absorption of carbon and releases, and at the moment it's a sort of a net release of greenhouse gas emissions from the UK, and then transport, and then aviation and shipping. And then over to the right hand side of the screen is that the transition should bring us all the way down to as close to zero as we possibly can get. But then there will be some remaining emissions, and also then we'll need to look at these things called GHG, greenhouse gas removal. So how we might sequester or store carbon, which you might have heard as into sort of carbon credits, or those sorts of things. So West Suffolk Council, I worked to help develop the trajectory of how the council might get towards net zero carbon. So if money wasn't an object, and we could do anything that we wanted to, could we get there? And the answer was yes. I mean, there was a hefty price tag of somewhere around £26 million or something like that. But that was including things like using hydrogen or anaerobic gases for vehicles, but also investing in more things like more energy generation, as well as reducing the energy and emissions from our buildings. So there was a whole raft of works behind that, but there's obviously a lot of work going on. So obviously the government's made its own ambition of about 2050, and then Suffolk has now just released its climate emergency plan, which is I've clicked here to a sort of a snip of their website. And it's from the Suffolk Climate Change Partnership, and there's lots of details there about the Suffolk Climate Emergency Plan. There's also the 2021 Suffolk Climate Change Partnership Review, and then there's those fact sheets there, which are very useful if you're involved in one of those schools or parish councils. They're actually aimed at councillors, but they're useful for anyone. They're talking about the different resources and links and support that you might be able to get if you're looking to try and take some action in those areas. This is just taken from the Suffolk Climate Emergency Plan document, and it's just showing the different emission sources in the area and how they sort of vary between the different district councils. And you can see in West Suffolk there's a larger grey area, which is the industry and commercial, and proportionally that's much bigger in terms of emissions from there. And this is a snip from the latest annual report, which has got all of the amazing stuff that's been going on. The work that we've been doing here in West Suffolk, but the other organisations, something like information about the Suffolk Carbon Charter, which is an accreditation scheme which small and medium-sized enterprises can utilise. You may well have seen things like Solar Together or other community energy projects, which are all listed there. So where do we start? I am a firm believer that we start with our carbon footprint. I did mine. I got a book called How Do We Save the World in I think about 2004, which really started my interest in greenhouse gas emission inventories, carbon footprinting, emissions reduction trajectories, and all these sorts of things. But the reality is that you need to know where you're starting. How much emissions from my house? How much from any flights I might take? Car use, other transportation, and then in this calculator, which is on the Green Suffolk website, the link is there. You can also have this secondary emission sources, which are they use like a value. So how many pounds do you spend on fuel, or how many pounds do you spend on services like economic services or insurance or clothes and things like that, and they're able to give you an approximation of how many tons of CO2 that might generate. And as you can see from my family, these secondary things we might do are the most significant source of emissions. In our home, we have insulated it. It's quite a small home. It's a mid-terrace home. We've insulated it, and we've also switched to an air source heat pump. We try not to fly, but that does mean that sometimes we end up driving across Europe to go and see family. And luckily, or not luckily, I chose to work at West Suffolk Council mainly because I can walk to work. And I realised some years ago, as I've been doing my carbon footprint over time, that actually the commute is one of those big sources of emissions for me. or it was. So in terms of your home, this is a really nice diagram, but we really need to make sure that we're taking our meter readings so we can learn how to reduce our energy consumption and switch things off. We need to improve the efficiency. So I talked about insulation there, and I'm sure all of you are aware of different types of insulation. Obviously, you can have external and internal wall insulation. If you've got solid walls, you've got cavity wall insulation, loft insulation of various types, even if you have rooms in loft and those sorts of things. And then, light emitting diodes or LEDs. This is the most efficient and best source of light, and that you can have any type of color, you can have any type of power and intensity. So LEDs are very diverse, and they can sort of match your requirements. So a nice yellow light is possible with LEDs, and also that bright clinical white as well, if you so wanted such a thing. And then after we've looked at those efficiency and looking at reduction, and we then need to think about what can we do for alternative energy sources. And I'm sure you've seen many solar panels around, and maybe you've talked to people who have air source or ground source heat pumps or biomass boilers, or some of those alternative ways to heat their homes. On the Green Stafford website, so again, bringing you back to the information that is available for you and that you can easily access. There's a whole page on energy, and that talks about the different grants that might be available depending on your status or your eligibility. There's also a loan. I have actually used the energy efficiency loan, a 0% loan, which is done through the Eastern Savings and Credit Loan Union, and that allows you I needed to pay for my air source heat pump, and I had so much money that I was going to use to replace the gas boiler, and I used the loan to then top up and help me afford to switch to an air source heat pump. And then there's loads of useful guides down on the left hand side there. There's different things that I talked about, solid wall insulation, but there's also these top tips for energy saving that you can look through. So those sort of things that we've just talked about, getting rid of the boiler, looking at the water temperature, making sure that things are unplugged, those sorts of things. All the things that we're all aware of, and the trick is trying to implement them, and then also once you've implemented them, keeping them going. So making sure that you do turn lights off when you leave the room, or that if you're cooking on a stove, that you keep the lid on, so you stop the evaporation and reduce the amount of energy you need to actually cook and boil whatever it is you're cooking. And it's a tricky thing to do, and it does require a commitment, but I think the thing to remember is that it's always about taking some action, acknowledging when things don't go exactly as you plan, and then taking some more action. So I talked a bit about lightings and LEDs, and that basically, if you have lighting now, it should be LEDs. So if you're looking to replace a light bulb, you should be looking for an LED light bulb. And that's really when you're talking about, especially when you're talking about things like compact fluorescent lamps. But if you have these old halogen dichroic spots, they're these GU 3.5 and GU 10. They're the ones that have got the little spikes or little sort of mushroom feet sticking out of the bottom, the round spots. If they're not LED, then you should look to replace those, even if they are still working, because the energy savings are so great that they not only pay for themselves, but in terms of energy, they pay for themselves very, very quickly. And you're wasting a lot of energy using that type of lighting. It's much more efficient to use a halogen light to create heat than it is to create light. And as we've all seen, the appliances energy efficiency rating in the bottom corner there. Now, when you're looking to replace a cooker, a fridge, a freezer, an oven, washing machine, a microwave oven, or even a car now, how energy efficient is it? What rating can you get? Same for your tyres, actually. How energy efficient are your tyres? How well do they perform in terms of noise? That's all rated. So one thing I would be interested to hear from people around, whoever listens to this, and I would be interested to hear about how you feel that your insulation is in your home. Have you got the loft insulation, up to the 300 millimeters, or have you got your walls insulated? Do you have a solid walled home? This image on the right hand side, this map on the right hand side, shows the distribution of solid wall properties in Suffolk, and interestingly, there's a bit of a correlation there, especially in the south of the area, in terms of access to gas, as well as having solid wall properties. You know, if you have got one, then you know, maybe there's something that we can do to try and look at bringing together schemes to try and support mass insulation projects. There is help for certain people from Suffolk Energy Action, and more information that you can find. And then obviously there's the Energy Saving Trust, which has lots of very good information on insulation and energy efficiency and renewable energy in general. I put this one on here about heating controls. There's been a lot of press about the ban on gas boilers, but at the same time, you know, there's been an explosion in heating controls. You know, you can buy them from online stores. You can buy heating controls from anywhere really now, and you can get these smart radiator valves. They can be connected to, you know, wireless thermostats or to apps on your phones. And the challenge then is about getting them installed. So are you confident enough to take off a thermostatic radiator valve and put them on? Again, there's lots of good advice out there about how to do that. And obviously then you could look to go to a plumber or someone that you know to support you to do it. But you know, if you have an older heating system that doesn't have thermostatic radiator valves, or it doesn't have a good controller, you'll be surprised by how much you can save. And these costs, although, you know, £200 looks good, these are for the, you know, the flashy, very impressive looking controls. But you know, it is logical that within 2 or 3 years you could pay off that, and obviously that's ongoing. And in addition to the energy cost saving and the emission savings, obviously makes your home feel much better, nicer to live in. We have a page on the West Suffolk website about energy efficiency support. There's some of the projects there, some of the information that you can get. And we're also looking at how we can support sort of an energy transition that people talk about, that sort of the move from big power stations, pumping it down there through the grid to your homes. What can we do to try and reverse that and look at this distributed energy generation and the use of energy near where it's being generated? And that one of our projects that we're working on is this European funded Interreg project called Advancing Communities Towards Low Carbon Energy Smart Systems. Bit of a mouthful, but it's working in Mildenhall and working with businesses in the Mildenhall Industrial Estate. Really useful source of information is the Suffolk Green Buildings Network. It's a few years old now, and it probably needs a bit more updating, but nevertheless, if you were thinking about solar panels or insulation, all those sorts of things, there's loads of examples on there, different materials. There's lots of, and they're all obviously all across Suffolk, and people have signed up that you could get in contact with them and go and have a look and talk to them about their experiences and understand what made them make their choices and sort of what learning they had, and obviously help you to make your decisions about what was best for you. So the big challenge for the UK as a whole actually is this renewable heat. So we're making lots of progress in terms of the decarbonisation of the grid supplied electrical energy. So lots of offshore wind and solar panels and those sorts of things. But what we still have is this gas mains, and we have obviously lots of people still with oil or LPG or even coal, and that's much more difficult to switch. And how do we move people to all this renewable heat? So like I said, I have this air source heat pump at home, but also the council has installed ground source heat pumps in the Apex and West Suffolk House. We've just recently installed one at Weststow Anglo-Saxon Village there to heat the buildings there, the visitor centre and the collections building and the toilets. And also then there's things like air source heat pumps, and we've helped the Bardwell Playing Fields Association to put an air source heat pump in their new pavilion building. And these things are now very well understood. They're easier to get hold of. The prices are coming down. And also that there are then incentives and schemes, and this one, the domestic renewable heat incentive, is available until March next year, 2022, and then that one will end, and that's a 7-year payment for the amount of heat you use from a renewable heat source, so solar thermal or a biomass boiler or some of those heat pumps I just mentioned. If you need to replace your boiler, then it's a good time to think about doing that, because this will give you a 7-year payment to help you recoup the cost, as well as obviously reduce the emissions from your home. It's a tricky one. It's not a straightforward one, and you know, if someone's thinking about doing this, I would encourage them to get support either from ourselves at the council or other organisations, because it'll just help you to navigate some of the information out there and hopefully get you closer and quicker towards sort of trusted suppliers. And that's exactly what was done with the Solar Together programme that's run across Suffolk, and it's actually a programme which has been run across the UK in many different locations. A third-party organisation helps the county council to publicise and get together like a cohort or a grouping of homes that are interested in having solar panels installed on their roofs, and then that is then taken to market at a guaranteed price and helps to guarantee the quality and the price of the works. I think it's closed at the moment, but I think they are looking to do another round, hence the register today. Again, if you have the roof space and you're interested in these sorts of things, solar panels are very cost effective. You know, there's a 7 to 10 year payback depending on how expensive the install is, and yes, it does help to make your home more energy or less emissions arising from your home. An interesting development which is coming about over the last couple of years, and I was just on an online session with the Energy Networks Association this week, is about local area planning, energy planning. It's something that we talked about and we've been talking about for a long time, but it seems to have gathered a lot more interest. UK Power Networks, which is the organisation that looks after our cables and wires in our area, they do a lot of energy planning, and they look at, you know, what is required for the transmission and distribution of energy, but also, you know, what energy generation is coming up. And what's happened is that process, which is very much focused on their needs as an organisation and how they meet our requirements, is sort of taking a step back from that and saying, as a local area, what do we need for our energy? So what do we need to help us to reduce or shift our energy demand? You know, how do we increase the amount of electric vehicle charging infrastructure? What can we do to increase the amount of distributed local energy? So more solar PV or wind or whatever it is you're interested in. And how can we get more support for heat decarbonisation? How can we link that into our energy demands for our area? So the local area energy planning is sort of led by this Energy Systems Catapult, and there's a link there to a webpage with some interesting information. And there's also something called the Centre for Sustainable Energy based over in Bristol, and they have some really great guides and information about how you might, as a community, start bringing together your thoughts and aspirations about energy and into a form which could then be utilised by organisations like the local DNO, as they call, or UK Power Networks, or even, you know, West Suffolk Council, you know, maybe as part of planning regulations and policy, or as part of Suffolk County Council's works to address greenhouse gas emissions from our area. So it's something that I'd love to see more of and be involved in, and it's great to see that it's now they're looking to see how they can bring stakeholders, so local communities, local authorities, local businesses, bring all of their requirements together into something that can be used to help deliver that energy transition that we are all talking about. So I've just put in a couple of slides here about different types of energy that we could use and where you might get some information. So this one is sort of about school. So potentially, you know, you're involved in a school, maybe you'll take kids to school, maybe there's a school nearby you. Obviously schools that have a large energy demand, they are a great place in terms of helping students to understand about energy. They're also, when you help students to understand about energy, they also help their parents to understand about energy. There's a lot of support that is generally required to help schools to reduce energy consumption. And I know that Suffolk County Council are working to try and improve the energy efficiency of different schools. But this diagram here is taken from a Carbon Trust document where they had done some data gathering on energy consumption in schools, and it shows how it says 58% of the energy use is for space heating, and then it shows that 15% is for hot water, 8% is for catering. And this is the sort of stuff that I used to do for businesses, to help them to understand how they're using their energy, and that then also then helps them to prioritize where they want to focus their time. And the other chart there is figure 1b. It shows the relative costs. So although fossil fuel heating is 58% of the energy used in this instance, and with the information they used at that time, it was only 45% of the costs. And you can see there that lighting is 20% of the cost. And nowadays, information and communication technology are a much higher amount of energy use, especially server rooms and those sorts of things. And that helps organizations to focus on what it is we should do. How much benefit can we get from turning the lights off, and what can we get from improving the performance of heating? So is it a 10% saving or a 20% saving? And the other document there is this whole school approach. And that sets out how, as a school, you might improve your energy and carbon footprint and energy management. It's actually almost a toolkit that you can work through and utilize to set up your procedure and make sure you're trying to make some progress and trying to reduce energy consumption. So yeah, so there is also information on the Green Suffolk website again. So I think this image here is of Stoke-by-Nayland School, which I believe was a community solar energy project. And there's information there. Eco Schools is still, I think, like the benchmark activity for schools to do, where you have a bronze, silver and gold level. But there's many other things out there. There's some solar schemes where, as a school, you don't have to pay for anyone, and people will install solar on your roofs. I found this for the Woodland Trust here, and they want to help schools to understand their greenhouse gas emissions, and then also about how they can sort of make progress on reducing them, and then also about the benefits of planting trees. At West Suffolk Council, we have a Solar for Business programme. We can also provide advice and support. And like I said, Suffolk County Council, I know, is looking at a programme of investment at the moment, and that's something that's only going to increase as time progresses. So yeah, energy at work is quite complex. So I haven't gone into too much information because it could be a hairdresser's, it could be a big office building, it could be a manufacturing site, and it's very difficult to give specific information because it does differ from each building type and energy user. But there is information available for SMEs on the Green Suffolk website. There's support there. There's accreditation schemes. There's events program. And then at West Suffolk, we also provide some support there in terms of, like I said, the Solar for Business. We've used or developed energy performance contracts and heat supply contracts before to install works without any cost for the business. And across the nation, there's all sorts of different programs, especially focusing at the moment in terms of manufacturing and industrial energy use, and how money can be brought in for research or feasibility or implementation. So there's some quite well-funded programs from the government to support those types of industries at the moment. This is something that just literally I saw today. So there was I was supposed to attend this meeting on Monday on the 24th of May, but I didn't have time, unfortunately. But it's talking about community energy in the south. It's also talking about this new program called Eastern New Energy, which is being run in conjunction with the University of East London, and obviously a number of different stakeholders in our area. There's all the details online on YouTube for you to watch and look at the different, listen to the different speakers. The lady actually in that image there is from Community Energy England, and talking about the role of community groups and how they can bring together activities to install renewable energy systems, so solar panels on schools or on community buildings, or biomass boilers that might serve like a little heat network for a range of buildings. There's lots of good examples on there. And then this Eastern New Energy is looking to support community groups, is looking to support businesses as well, to try and help make some progress on some of these more difficult issues. So if people are interested in how they can make progress on at home, or how they can help their community, or maybe a street level project, something I've always wondered about is, in my street, could we get rid of all the gas boilers and just have one boiler to supply all our homes, those sorts of things. if you're interested in doing those things, then you know, I definitely would like to hear from you. And there's definitely a lot of resources and information and advice out there. And the Centre for Sustainable Energy has a planned local toolkit as well, which helps you to think through any ideas you might have, and also to bring on board different groups. And finally, my last thing is about recommended viewing. It's something I stumbled across last night on the BBC iPlayer. There are other TV channels out there, but this is the People versus Climate Change, and it's actually a documentary made about the climate assembly that was undertaken earlier in 2020. And this is where they brought 100 people just at random together to talk through the issues of climate change, and then to plan how they might help, how we can take action as a country to address our greenhouse gas emissions. And it's a very interesting documentary with some really great stuff in it. It shows real people thinking about a very complex subject. And actually, in relation to that, all of the sessions that they took part in are actually available on YouTube, so you can watch those from their Committee on Climate Change YouTube channel. So my last couple of slides, so that this is what's happening this year in the UK. So the Conference of Parties number 26 is taking place in November, and lots of people are very, very excited by this happening, and keen to see what sort of progress is going to be coming along. And maybe that's another way to help galvanise some activity in our communities. You know, what can we do in response to this global challenge, and how could we sort of show that we also want to make progress. It's not just about a government level. You know, there's benefits for us, and we can reap those rewards, not just in terms of the reduced greenhouse gas emissions, but in terms of improvements in health in our communities, and also even generating income for our communities. So I have some contacts and links there to finish off. And obviously you can contact the council, myself, or anybody else within the Environment and Energy team, and we'll be happy to help and work through all these things with you. So thanks very much for listening. Let's try and stop sharing now. Stop sharing, there it is.
Oliver, thank you very much. There's a lot in that presentation. I know Alan joined us a little bit into the meeting. The only question I have in the chat was from Mark, and I don't know if you want to. Did you want to read that out yourself, Mark, or I don't know if you've got a microphone, or you much rather I did it. If you want to just put it in the chat, or do it yourself.
I mean, I can take it on as well.
Yeah.
I can
well,
see
you see it in the
there,
chat
so.
anyway. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just add something to what Mark has written? He mentioned solar panels. I'd actually written down during one of your slides, is, as Mark alludes to, we've got north of where I live, we've got 2,500 houses going up over as part of Vision 2031. And not once during all the procedures and during the planning applications was the energy saving or climate or whatever it is side of things really included. So things like ground source heat pumps, centralized ones, as you mentioned, just for your street. The government's recently announced that boilers 2025, no gas boilers anymore, but they're laying on gas to the site. And I know a lot of this is part of the local plan. We can't force these things on developers because it's not in our local plan. But I just wondering how we get these developers, and it doesn't have to be the one across the road from me, it could be anybody, how we get them, like Mark has said about solar panels, how we get them to convince them to put these things in from day one, and like the infrastructure for electric vehicle charging points, all that sort of stuff. How do we convince them to do that now, before the person buys the house, rather than the person themselves having to do it?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a major sticking point, and unfortunately, the origins of the sticking point is actually building regulations, and because the default approach is to build to the building regulations requirements, even though the building regulations requirements is a minimum standard. So you should build to that as a minimum. There's no upper standard, but that's the minimum standard. And the government made lots of progress. It had its net zero homes plan, which we should have been achieved by now, basically, if that was still in place. But that was cancelled. And in terms of the planning policies within West Suffolk, they were reviewed in 2015, and the council did put forward for emissions and energy saving requirements and environmental requirements, but with the appetite for those sorts of things at that time, they were turned down, and they sort of limited what we could have in terms of our planning policy. So that's the sort of the background of where we are. So in terms of solar panels, I mean, you see them now on a lot of new houses already going in, and in most places, it's the reason for them not going in is the economic constraints for the developer. They don't think that it's worth the additional money. They're not going to get their money back by putting these things on. By putting solar panels on the roof of a building, there is no real benefit to the developer because they've sold the house at that point, so there's no financial benefit in that. That's what they thought anyway. And but the simple truth is, people generally don't do things unless you make them. As we know about recycling, the landfill tax made recycling jump forwards, and it made us all do more, and it brought a lot more interest into how we deal with waste and recycling. And so what we need to have now is good night. That's my children. What we need to have now is we need to have these better regulations, and so the planning regulations have been reviewed. So there's new ones coming forward in 2021. They are being set out of what they're going to be. The house builders, they know that they can make those requirements. They know they can do that. I think one of the documents showed there was a 0.7% cost increase by building to this increased standard, and that's a 31% reduction on emissions based to the 2013 standards. So we are going to see a step change, and they've also published a 2050 or 2025 target, which is called for future home standard, and then that's going to be taking us all the way towards net zero homes, so 75 to 80% emission savings. So there is a lot going on there, and there is a lot of progress. Sort of we've been waiting to happen, and suddenly just jump forwards. But we do, as someone said, there is a gap between the local plan and where we are, and that is one of the things that we're working on. So something I didn't touch upon is that in West Suffolk, we had a task force that looked at the climate emergency, and there was a number of different actions that came out of that, and they linked to the different departments of the council. So planning policy, my team, housing, some of the transport elements, and they've been taken forward. So I'm working with colleagues now to look at how we can create a sort of, we can't create a new policy, but we can create a sort of a document, a guidance document pointing developers towards, that you should be doing better than you are right now. We all know that. We all want that. The government's even said that it's set out its net zero target. So really, although the planning, the building regulations aren't where we want them to be, where you need to be going to, and that's what we're looking to see. So it is a really tricky one. I really wish that there was a simple answer to it, but it does feel like we've made a lot of progress since I've been at the council. So I'm hoping that that will continue, and we can see some better quality homes being brought forwards.
Yeah, I agree totally. Was there any more questions from the attendees? I've got a few, but you know what I'm like with asking things before I carry on.
I've got one thing else to add to that, though, because we do think about new houses, but a few years ago, hopefully it wasn't 10 years ago, but I remember it was a while ago. There was some work done by Oxford University, and they established that by 2050, all the houses and buildings that were built at that time, all of those houses we'll have in 2050, 80% of those are already built now. So when you think about the benefits and how you're going to change and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, yes, we do need to work on new buildings, but actually we really need to focus on the buildings that are existing.
Yeah. Well, actually, that leads me on. I can't see any other questions. It leads me on nicely, actually. What you said quite early on in the presentation is and when you worked out your carbon footprint, which I didn't even know that that calculator exists, but I see it now. I'm going to log on in a little while and work it out. Is how we educate, and it has to start with the young people, because they're the future. Using the cliche, is things like turning off the television when they're not watching it, closing the door, switching off lights, and that's obviously a thing through schools and also parents, guardians. They need to do that. So that's really more of a statement, perhaps. I was quite interested. Very early on, you had pie charts with showing emissions, and you had aviation and shipping there, which I think is about 3 or 4%, if I vaguely remember. Being from a marine background, I'm very interested in the shipping thing, because I know what they've been doing. I've been in the business for about 7 years, but I know what we were doing in terms of sulfur, low sulfur fuels and all this sort of stuff. But I just wondered, later on, you had another couple of graphs, which was for East Suffolk, West Suffolk, etc., with the local authority CO2 side of things. And I wonder whether the transport sector, now you may not know this, but the transport sector, does that include aviation, as in, I don't know, RAF Lakenheath, for example? So
no, it doesn't. In fact, actually, military operations are outside of that, so they're they're a mist of cloud that nobody's got a number for.
Literally.
So the data that they use for that comes from these middle and lower output, super output areas data that you can get. You can get it on the internet. You can go onto the government website and find it. And it's basically fuel sales within postcodes, and it's sort of anonymized and aggregated, and then that is utilized alongside actual consumption from meters. Again, done the same thing, so it's done at like a postcode level, and it's aggregated, and that they can then break it down into areas. So you can to some extent get quite accurate. So when we were looking at, say, the that project I mentioned in Mildenhall, the access project, we were able to get like the postcode area for that, however many different meters, and you can find out the sort of the total amount of energy that's used, electrical or gas energy that's used from that space.
Okay. You mentioned, obviously, and you showed links to various schemes, and in the past, when we've had like a solar panel scheme on available, the public were told about it, in terms of whether it's leaflets or anything else. I think one of the things that a lot of people, and certainly I do as well, is, and you can obviously go to places like Green Suffolk and all that sort of stuff, is people actually finding out, I want to put solar panels on my roof, or what you said last week as well about solid, I've got a solid wall thing here, and I mentioned about external insulation.
Yes.
Are there actually any current schemes that you need to find out about? So if there is a street that wants to put solar panels on, what you don't really want is every single household trying to do their own thing. I guess from economies of scale and cost, you could potentially get together, but it's trying to get that trigger for those people. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky thing. You sort of you're getting people to change or take action is a very tricky thing, and I think there are a number of things that support it. About knowledge, interest. There might be some, like you said, some sort of trigger. There's something they've seen that spurs them on. But what there's been found by the sort of the studies that are done into this is that generally we learn from our peers. It's the people around us that help move us in a direction. So we aspire to be like the footballers or the successful people in the world, and for some people they are very key goals to be like those. But actually, most of us is about, what are my friends and my family, what are they doing, and you sort of learn from each other. They found that's the most successful way. So in a community, like coming together as a community and looking at what people around you have already done, is probably the best way to create those triggers, actually. Because what you do is, you, rather than it being a salesman, it being me that you've never seen before telling you that it's a really great idea to do these things, it's people you know, and they're saying, yeah, like I've did it, and yeah, some of it works and some of it's a bit trickier and some of it's easier, but you know, overall is very positive, and you should do the same thing. And that's the thing that actually we find that we respond to. And that links into what you said before about the sort of the switching off of things at home, and you know, it's the young, but it's not really the young now. What we're in is, because we're in this difficult time in which we need to take action now. It isn't the young, it's everyone. We all need to learn, and the most important thing is to do something, is to take some action, because what happens with that is that once you've taken some action, you can see the benefits from it. It encourages you. You think, oh, I've done well, I did a good job, I want to do something more, you know, and that sort of mentality, it snowballs, and it leads to new avenues. And also you become a spokesperson. You're like, oh, I've done a good job with, like me, I've insulated my home and I've got an air source heat pump, you know, aren't I great? But the reality is that without meaning to, you become a spokesperson, and that information is the stuff that goes into our subconscious, and we take forwards.
Yeah, I just see if I got any other questions at the moment. Sorry to hog the limelight, as it were, but I've written some stuff down. Obviously, electric vehicles, you know, seems to be the thing of the day. I'm not saying that they should be. I'm sure there's other technology out there eventually is going to come along that supersedes electric. You know, at the end of the day, we're still talking about a four-wheeled rubber tired vehicle with an engine in it, which was designed, you know, 130 odd years ago in its primary design. But one thing was about, I'm just trying to think where I lost it here.
It's interesting when you think about it.
It's about the capacity for those EV charging points. You know, you mentioned about the local, what you called it, local area energy planning. And I did wonder whether, is that a local thing? I mean, it can't be a local thing, because obviously it has to be generated from somewhere, whether it's solar, whether it's wind, gas, whatever it is, nuclear. But how do we cope with what potentially could be a massive increase in electric vehicles over the next 10, 15, 20 years, when perhaps we don't actually have the energy generation capacity?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that's being worked on at the moment, and it is a challenge that everyone's known. But I mean, I don't know if you've seen how much offshore wind is going off around East Anglia at the moment. You know, we've got so many gigawatts of energy which is going on out there, and obviously that comes at a time, and it's less at others and all those sorts of things. But the in terms of electric vehicles, there's a couple of myths about them. So electric vehicle over its lifetime is more cost effective and more greenhouse gas effective than a internal combustion engine vehicle, and also a hybrid vehicle. There's only one exception to that, is where there's a lot of coal that's used to generate electricity, and that's when it becomes a bit more imperative. But obviously, in everywhere, the coal should go down. In terms of you know, the sort of the charging and storage, I was talking to a gentleman the other day. He's a business owner, and he's got one of those Swish new Mercedes electric SUVs, and you know, and he can drive for like 2 or 3 days without charging it. You know, the range, the mileage is expanding. You know, the charging controls are much cleverer now as well, so that you know, if there's too much going on in terms of the power supply from that area, then that, you know, your charger can ramp back a bit, so it doesn't put too much energy into the vehicle. You know, there's lots to be done. You know, the smart meters that are going into our homes, they're actually becoming smarter. There was some legislation that's passed recently, and that's allowing the energy that we use at home to be settled on a half-hourly basis. So it means that we will get more time of use tariffs are going to start coming through. So then there's that thing about, well, it's going to cost me loads of money to charge my car at 5 o'clock, so maybe I'll just wait till during the night. And there's some good. There's a tariff called Octopus Agile tariff, which a lot of electric vehicle owners use, because you can effectively charge your vehicle when it's free. So that it shows you the price, and when there's loads of wind power going and low demands, and the price drops to negative, and you get paid to charge your vehicle. And obviously with solar panels on houses, with battery storage and all those sorts of things, what we're starting to do is, instead of having these big peaks, we're starting to sort of have a more stable electrical demand, which we're able to sort of store and use energy as we want to. So it is a challenge, and there is more to be done, but things are moving along so quickly now. It's really exciting.
Yeah, I look at the Grid Watch page quite regularly, which is really good. Aaron, did you want to say anything about your problems with electric charging?
Yeah, I was just saying that we like to have an electric car. It's just where I am, our parking's on block, so I've got no access to electricity where I park my car. So in terms of charging, it'd be a problem. Obviously, if range increases, then I suppose maybe my workplace would install chargers at some point, and maybe that's the way around it. But
yeah, I mean, so the council has trialled some sort of curbside charging facilities, and we're interested to hear from people like yourself about where you live and what your sort of needs are. And one of my colleagues, he actually did his master's in like people's actual driving needs compared to their sort of thoughts about the range of electric vehicles. And and what you find is the majority of the time everyone's journeys are fully able to be within a charging thing. I know one of my neighbours, they have electric vehicle, and they've just got a 3-pin plug, and they top it up just from their house, and they've both worked out that they can get to work and back, and then they can chop it overnight, and then their husband can use it the next day and go back to work and back. And it's one of those things, it does require a change in the way you look at vehicles. We're used to filling up the car, driving for however many days, filling up the car. To some extent, we're getting closer to that, depending on how many miles you drive. But yeah, it is a bit tricky. But I think there isn't that much. When I live in a terrace street, and there is no off-street parking, so we couldn't do it either. We couldn't. We'd have to have an extension lead going over the path, and people will be tripping over it and stuff. So, but I think those sorts of things are going to change, and the other facilities that are available. And I'm not an expert on the different. There's loads of different networks as well, so you can pay differently to you can access. So some people charge like you said, charge their cars at work, and then bring them back home again. So there are lots of options out there, and it's moving quickly. But there's I think it's one of those things that I think when you're wanting to replace your car is probably the time really to then think about it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I think Aaron is quite right. And I think Alan hopefully will say something in a minute. I think we would love to see, certainly down here in Haverhill, a lot more discussion regarding that inability for people to charge their cars, because they're either garage blocks, terraced houses. A lot of our estates were built basically that the car was parked away from your house. And that will need a conversation with the likes of Haverhill, and all these sort of people. So, Alan, did you want to say anything?
I should just say before we move on from that, the council has just installed some electric vehicle charging points is it called Kettle Market, round the back of the council offices?
Corn Exchange, but that's another matter because unfortunately none of us were consulted on the ideal location. But I have had an email from Matthew Axton today.
Oh, you have?
Yeah.
I think it's a very tricky funding program that they're using to do that. But and again, that's another reason for giving us your thoughts and knowledge on these things that helps to inform our decisions as we move along.
Okay, Alan, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank
you.
Good. Okay. Sorry, I've had problems with my phone here. Yeah, my immediately thought on EV charging is that the county council's curb dropping criteria, as we were discussing on the planning committee last night, tend to really limit the possibility. Even if you've got some front garden that you could pull a car onto, as I do, I could just about fit the length of my car onto my front garden, but I can't apply for a curb crossing because I forget what the issue is. Basically, my frontage is too narrow. I think if I went for a joint crossing with my neighbour, that would mean that my other neighbours wouldn't ever be able to have a drop curb. So, the criteria are all geared around trying to maintain as much on-street parking as possible, and that's kind of militating against people getting their vehicles off the road onto their premises so that they could charge at home. Which for someone like me who doesn't go to work, I don't have anywhere that, it's either home or a non-existent or scarce charging point in town somewhere that I don't even know where that would be at the moment to get the wretched thing charged up. And I am ready to buy a new vehicle, any time now, but I just don't see the way forward until something moves, and I'm not sure quite what has to move. Thank you.
But I think there's no perfect solution. I think in some of these situations, but there are always opportunities. So there are companies that will install sort of faster charging facilities. They'll do that for free. There is government funding out there that within certain eligibility and requirements and constraints, that there's again money to enable these things. Like you mentioned Haverhill, Haverhill potentially, if they own the land, they could look to install these with, it's effectively will provide income for the organisation, so there are always options. But I think right now, what is the most important thing to stress, and this is whether it's electric vehicle charging or solid all insulation, as you mentioned before, is about getting numbers of people together. So if it's one person, if it's 5 people, if it's 10 people, because 20 people is almost an investable project, and if for us in my team and those across Suffolk, if we get 20 or 50 people saying, I want to insulate my home, or I want solar panels, or I want electric vehicle charging, we can go out and look for funding to try and support that. We can try and support you as a community group to then help that happen. And it might be like, across the country, there's all sorts of examples. There's some amazing community energy groups in Brighton. There's a website called Ethex. You can invest in community groups all across the country, where basically once they've got this one project up and running and they understand how it works in terms of, you see it with community-owned pubs, where people invest in the pub. You can do the same thing for the electric vehicle infrastructure. There's many examples of these things across the country. I think there's a good electric vehicle community project in Cambridge. Actually, I remember seeing that on an awards. They won an award last year or so before. So they actually grouped together to say we want electric vehicle infrastructure, and they invested in it themselves, and then they own it, and obviously the benefits then go to them as a community group. So and that I'm not sure exactly what happens with it, but so these examples are all out there. So although we have these issues and uncertainties as individuals, we've got to this point now where I was talking again about hydrogen vehicles again. I can't believe that I'm talking about hydrogen vehicles, and really, sincerely, I just saw today that one of the companies that we've spoken to over the last year, they've now just got sold a product to Octopus Energy for a 1 megawatt electrolyzer. They are going to be generating hydrogen with Octopus Energy. So all of these solutions are out there. It's just about bringing together the opportunities, the challenges, the interest, and then bringing that together into a way in which we can help to take the project forward.
That's great. Thank you for that, Oliver. I can't see any other questions in the chat. The only I've got a couple of little things here. One was obviously you mentioned about LED lights, and we all know the benefits of that. I suppose there is a slight concern about the disposal of LED lights and lithium batteries and all this sort of stuff. But I just want to add also, as mentioned by I think Colin last week, that I helped fund through my council locality money a thermal imaging camera for I've tried it on my house and my business. Probably not the best time of year when we're not got any heating on or anything like that, but I thought I'd use it as a baseline. So come the winter, I'll do the same thing again. And you mentioned about the loft insulation, the 10 inches, and I think I mentioned I don't really know what's in there because I know I've got loft insulation, but I've got boarded loft as well. So I know obviously that keeps heating as well, but it may be my investment to lift those boards up and put a bit more underneath it, I suspect. Is there anybody else got any questions at all? I can't. Mark, I know, hasn't got a microphone, so I've asked him. He hasn't answered. Nothing from Aaron. Nothing from Aaron. Oliver, thank you very much indeed for your time. I really appreciate it. Lots of stuff there. As I said, this will be going out on the Town Council website as a video podcast, or whatever the modern terminology for that is. I'll get rid of any beginning and end that went wrong. And I appreciate your time again, Oliver. And
no, thanks very much. It's really fantastic to be able to talk to people, and hopefully we can help to support garner some more interest and some activity in Haverhill. And I know that there's Community Energy Fortnight coming up in this summer. I think is it later in June or July? Early July it is. And then there's another sort of Green Week in September. And then obviously, like I said, there's the Conference of Parties in November. So there's going to be some opportunities for reasons to get together and to talk about these things, and coming up. So I think trying to encourage others to bring their questions forward, to make some time, send some emails, make a list of things that they want, and we'll see what we can do.